Some nightmares don't just haunt your dreams. They walk among us, wearing familiar faces. My hunt takes me to the rural heart of the Philippines, where a string of brutal murders terrorizes a remote village. They whisper of the aswang, a shapeshifter, a creature that detaches its upper torso to fly through the night, seeking human prey. This time, the monster isn't just a legend, it's a killer hiding in plain sight. Another grimy port city in Southeast Asia, another temporary refuge that offered little solace from the ghosts of my past, or the ever-present shadow of the agency. The cycle continued, each new location blurring into the last, the only constant being the grim reality of my work. The information arrived through an encrypted channel, a faint signal from a life I no longer remembered, yet one that still occasionally tethered me to these dark assignments. The report was terse, devoid of emotion but chilling in its details. A series of brutal, unexplained deaths in a remote, impoverished village in the Philippines. Victims mutilated, wounds that baffled local authorities, or perhaps wounds they chose not to understand. And woven through the sparse official lines were the terrified whispers of the locals. Aswang, the swang. The name itself carried a primal dread, different from other entities I'd faced. This wasn't just myth. It felt like something torn from the darkest, most visceral corners of folklore. My initial research painted a horrifying picture, a shapeshifter, a ghoul, a creature of the night capable of gruesome transformations and possessing an insatiable hunger, often for the unborn or the dying. Some tales even described it detaching its upper torso, its viscera trailing behind as it flew in search of prey. A familiar weariness settled over me, the kind that came with the anticipation of another brutal, bloody hunt. The kind that left you feeling hollowed out, questioning the very fabric of existence. Yet, beneath the exhaustion, a grim curiosity stirred. A shapeshifter of this nature was a new kind of nightmare, distinct in its horror, cunning, deceptive, and deeply embedded in human fear. My logical mind, a stubborn remnant, tried to inject skepticism. Mass hysteria? A cunning human killer exploiting local superstitions? Possible. But the consistency of the reported injuries, the sheer terror described in the fragmented reports, and the almost universal belief in the aswang in that region, these were elements I couldn't simply dismiss. The agency had certainly dealt with things far stranger, or perhaps they had even created some. Alrawela. The decision, as always, was swift, almost a reflex. The Philippines it was. Preparation was more than just packing gear. It was an immersion into the lore of the aswang, a complex entity with various regional interpretations. The blood-sucking mandarugo, the viscera-eating manananggal, the one that supposedly split its body, the corpse-stealing tik-tik. Understanding its forms, its supposed weaknesses, garlic, salt, stingray tails, prayers, and its hunting patterns would be crucial. I also brushed up on what little Tagalog I knew, anticipating the silence and fear that would greet an outsider. This wasn't just another case. The described brutality, the deeply ingrained local terror, all pointed to something exceptionally dangerous. As I boarded the flight to Manila, and then a series of smaller, increasingly rickety transports into the provincial hinterlands, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was heading into a darkness far more profound and perhaps far more human than I had faced in a long time. The hunt for the aswang had begun, and I had a sinking feeling it would demand more than just bullets and steel. The final leg of the journey was a bone-jarring ride on a sputtering, overloaded jeepney that navigated treacherous, muddy tracks. When I finally arrived in the village, a loose scattering of stilt houses made of bamboo and nipa palm nestled precariously between dense, humid jungle and rain-swollen rice paddies. The air itself felt heavy, thick with unspoken dread. It was likely the tail end of the monsoon season. The sky was a perpetual bruised gray, and a damp, cloying humidity clung to everything, amplifying the scent of wet earth and something else, something akin to decay. This wasn't the respectful awe I'd encountered in Mizukami when the kappa was mentioned. Here, the fear was a palpable entity, a suffocating blanket smothering the community. Windows were shuttered early, even in the oppressive heat. The usual sounds of a rural village, children's laughter, idle chatter, were conspicuously absent. What remained was an unnerving quiet, broken only by the incessant drone of insects and the occasional nervous barking of a gaunt dog. My presence, as an outsider, a tall foreigner with an unreadable face, did little to alleviate the tension. It only seemed to deepen it. Eyes watched me from the shadows of doorways, then quickly darted away if I met their gaze. There were no welcoming smiles, no curious inquiries, just a wall of suspicion and raw, unadulterated fear. The poverty was stark. Homes were dilapidated. Basic necessities seemed scarce, and the faces of the villagers were etched with hardship long before the current terror had taken root. It was a breeding ground for desperation, for superstition, for the kind of fear that could give life to any manner of nightmare. I couldn't help but draw a grim parallel. When people were stripped of hope and security, what horrors might they conjure? Or worse, what horrors might be drawn to their despair? My first priority was to visit the sites of the recent killings. Getting any clear information was like pulling teeth. The local barangay captain, a harried man who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, offered little more than platitudes and warnings to leave. The crime scenes, if they could even be called that, were a mess. Any potential physical evidence had been either obliterated by the elements or, more likely, by the villagers themselves in their panicked, superstitious attempts to cleanse the areas. They'd sprinkled salt, hung garlic, and placed crude religious icons everywhere. Understandable, perhaps, given their terror, but a nightmare for any kind of methodical investigation. Trying to interview the locals was even more frustrating. Most refused to speak to me at all, shaking their heads vigorously and retreating indoors. Those who did speak offered only hushed, fragmented accounts, their voices laced with terror, their eyes wide with the conviction that the ASWANG was responsible. They spoke of dark shadows on wings, of unholy thirsts, and of victims found with their insides hollowed out. Logic told me to be wary of such embellished tales, but the consistency of their fear was undeniable. They didn't trust an outsider, especially one asking questions about things they believed were best left undisturbed. Just as I was about to concede defeat for the day, a young man approached me tentatively. He wore the ill-fitting uniform of a local police officer, his face youthful but already lined with a weariness that belied his age. He introduced himself as Officer Ramos. "They won't talk to you, sir," he said quietly, his English hesitant but clear. "They are too scared. Even we don't know what to do." He gestured vaguely towards the jungle. "These killings, they are not normal." He couldn't offer much in terms of concrete evidence, but he did confirm the strange nature of the wounds, the lack of any conventional motive, and the complete breakdown of any rational investigation due to the pervasive fear of the ASWANG. He seemed genuinely desperate, a man caught between his duty and the overwhelming superstition of his community. He was perhaps the only person so far who hadn't immediately dismissed me or tried to scare me away. A small crack in the wall of silence, maybe. But whether it would lead anywhere was another question entirely. The night was falling, and with it, the village would once again surrender itself to the reign of the ASWANG, or whatever terror truly stalked its darkened paths. With the villagers locked behind their flimsy doors, a suffocating silence descended upon the village as true darkness fell. This was ASWANG time, according to every terrified whisper I'd heard. If I was going to find any answers, it wouldn't be in the light of day, not with a community paralyzed by fear. It would be out here, in the oppressive Philippine night, alone. My patience, honed by countless nights spent waiting, observing, became my primary tool. My senses, already sharp, dialed up to an almost painful acuity. The humid air, thick with the scent of damp earth and unknown blossoms, now seemed to carry other, fainter traces. The metallic tang of old blood, a cloying sweetness that hinted at decay. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every snap of a twig, every distant animal call, registered with heightened significance. I moved like a ghost through the unlit pathways between the stilt houses, then further out, towards the edges of the jungle and the more isolated dwellings where some of the attacks had occurred. The feeling of being watched was a constant companion, a prickling sensation on my skin. It wasn't just the unseen eyes of terrified villagers peering through cracks in their walls. This felt different, more predatory, an awareness that I was treading in something else's hunting ground. The air itself seemed to thrum with a nervous energy, a palpable sense of impending danger. It was hard not to think about the people cowering in their homes, their lives dictated by this nocturnal terror. The sheer, grinding helplessness of their situation was a heavy weight. To live day in, day out under such a constant threat, with no real protection, no one to turn to, it was a kind of living damnation. It fueled a cold anger within me, a grim determination to unearth whatever was responsible for this reign of fear. The first few nights yielded little more than heightened tension and a growing familiarity with the nocturnal symphony of the jungle. But then, the signs began to appear, subtle at first, then more distinct. A strange scraping sound on the nipa palm roof of an abandoned hut, too deliberate for an animal, followed by a fleeting, impossibly large shadow that blotted out the faint starlight for a mere second. It was gone before I could get a clear look, but the impression it left was of something vast, something with wings. Later, near a cluster of banana trees close to where one of the victims had lived, I caught a whiff of it, a foul, coppery stench mixed with something like rotting meat and sulfur. It was a smell that turned my stomach, a smell that screamed of something unnatural, something unholy. The ASWANG'S signature, if the legends were to be believed. One night, following a barely perceptible trail of disturbed earth and broken foliage, I found myself near an old, overgrown cemetery on the outskirts of the village. It was a desolate, eerie place, the graves marked by simple wooden crosses, many askew or fallen. And there, near a freshly disturbed grave, though no body had been reported stolen, I found them. Claw marks, deep and sharp, gouged into the soft earth, unlike anything a known local animal could make. Alongside them, a few dark, leathery scales, almost reptilian, and a single, coarse, black feather that felt unnervingly stiff and oily to the touch. This was no ordinary predator. I carefully collected the samples, my mind racing. The evidence was mounting, pointing unequivocally towards a non-human entity, something that matched the terrifying descriptions of the ASWANG with unnerving accuracy. The stories weren't just superstition. There was something real out here, something monstrous, and it was actively hunting. The question now was, what was its true form, and how could it be stopped? The nights were long, but I sensed I was getting closer to the fiend. Too close, perhaps. Days bled into nights, each one a grueling cycle of cautious daytime inquiry and tense nocturnal hunts. The scales, the feather, the distinct claw marks, the pervasive stench. I laid out my meager evidence in the cramped, humid room Officer Ramos had helped me secure. It wasn't much, but combined with the local folklore and the nature of the attacks, a chilling picture was beginning to form. My knowledge of shapeshifters and folkloric predators, pieced together from forgotten agency files, arcane texts, and raw experience, suggested I was dealing with something that could alter its form, or at least had multiple states of being. The manananggal aspect of the ASWANG legend, the self-segmenting viscera eater with bat-like wings, seemed increasingly plausible given the rooftop sounds and the fleeting, winged shadow I'd glimpsed. The ability to detach its upper torso would explain its aerial capabilities and its capacity to enter homes through small openings. The pressure was immense. Each passing night without a definitive answer meant another potential victim. The fear in the village was a palpable weight, and I felt it pressing down on me, a silent accusation. I wasn't just hunting a monster, I was racing against a body count. As I spent more time observing the village, not just its fears, but its daily rhythms, its social fabric, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. The victims weren't random, they were often the most vulnerable. the elderly living alone, the sick, a young pregnant woman whose loss had particularly devastated the community. These were individuals on the fringes, those less able to defend themselves, those whose disappearances might, in a cruelly pragmatic sense, cause less immediate disruption to the village's core. Was the ASWANG'S specifically targeting the weak, or was there something else at play? A darker secret hidden beneath the surface of this impoverished, fear-stricken community. The thought that the ASWANG might be more than just a supernatural predator, that it could be intertwined with the village's societal issues, a manifestation of neglect, a tool for some hidden agenda, or even a desperate act born from the very poverty and injustice that permeated this place, began to take root in my mind. It was a disquieting notion, one that blurred the lines between monster and man even further. Then came the night I finally saw it. Not clearly, not fully, but enough. I'd set up a discreet observation post in a tall, half-rotted tree, overlooking a particularly isolated cluster of huts, an area that seemed to fit the ASWANG's targeting pattern. Hours passed in a tense, mosquito-bitten vigil. Just as the moon dipped behind a thick bank of clouds, plunging the landscape into near-total darkness, I heard it, a soft, wet tearing sound from one of the huts below. It was followed by a low, guttural moan. My night vision goggles, though not top-of-the-line agency tech, were good enough. I focused them on the hut. What I saw made my stomach lurch. From the thatched roof, something was emerging. It was grotesque, a horrifying silhouette against the faint ambient light. An upper human torso, unnaturally elongated, with what looked like enormous, leathery wings unfurling from its back. The lower half was gone, severed. It hovered for a moment, a dark, predatory shape. Then, with a powerful downbeat of its wings, it launched into the night sky, silent as death. A long, proboscis-like tongue or appendage dangling beneath it. It was a fleeting glimpse, but it was undeniable. The Manananggal. The ASWANG was real, and its most terrifying form was not just a story. Weskaspian. My heart hammered against my ribs. I didn't engage. I was outmatched in the air, and my priority was information. It flew towards the edge of the jungle, in the direction of the old cemetery. I now had a potential hunting ground, a possible lair. Before it disappeared completely, it seemed to pause mid-air, its head turning slightly, as if it sensed my observation. I couldn't be sure, but for a chilling second, I felt a malevolent awareness directed my way. This wasn't just a mindless beast, it was intelligent. It was aware, and it knew it was being watched. The stakes had just been raised considerably. I knew its form, or one of its forms. Now I had to figure out how to ground this nightmare, permanently. And I had a growing suspicion that the key to defeating the ASWANG lay not just in garlic and salt, but in understanding the darkness that festered within the village itself. Seeing the Manananggal form of the ASWANG, witnessing its grotesque flight, solidified the horrifying reality. This wasn't just a creature of myth. It was a tangible aerial predator, and it was actively hunting the villagers. The image of that severed torso taking to the sky was burned into my mind, a chilling testament to the unnatural forces at play. My priority shifted from mere observation to active engagement. I had to set a trap. This wouldn't be easy. The ASWANG was cunning, and its ability to fly gave it a significant advantage. It could strike from anywhere, retreat into the vast, impenetrable jungle, or even, as some legends suggested, reintegrate with its lower half, disappearing amongst the very people it terrorized. My approach needed to be meticulous, a blend of ancient folklore and modern tactical thinking. My makeshift headquarters, the small, stuffy room Ramos had found for me, became a workshop. I spent the daylight hours poring over my notes, cross-referencing ASWANG lore with my own knowledge of hunting and trapping. Garlic, salt, holy water, blessed oils, the stingray's tail, known locally as bunto pagi, these were the traditional deterrents. While my inherent skepticism made me question their true efficacy against such a powerful entity, I couldn't afford to dismiss any potential advantage, especially given the villagers' deep-seated belief in them. If nothing else, they might serve as a psychological deterrent or a distraction, but I wouldn't rely on folklore alone. I had my own tools: high-tensile tripwires, motion sensors salvaged from old equipment, and a plan to use the terrain to my advantage. The old cemetery, where I'd found the scales and feather, and the general direction the Aswang had flown, seemed like a logical starting point. It was isolated, offered some cover, and was already associated with death and the macabre, fitting for such a creature. My determination to end this reign of terror was absolute, a cold, hard knot in my gut. The fear of the villagers, their silent suffering, had become a personal burden. Even if they didn't trust me, even if they saw me as just another unwelcome outsider, I owed it to them, to the memory of the victims, to try and stop this thing. The agency might have trained me for far more complex operations, but this felt raw, elemental, a primal fight against a primal evil. Choosing the right location for the trap was critical. I scouted the periphery of the cemetery and the surrounding jungle, looking for a natural choke point, a flight path the Aswang might favor, or a potential resting place. I found a dilapidated, abandoned mausoleum, its roof partially caved in, offering both concealment for me and a potential lure for a creature drawn to places of death. As I was making my preparations, Officer Ramos appeared. He'd been keeping his distance, torn between his official duty and the fear that permeated his village. But seeing my focused activity, the strange collection of items I was assembling, he seemed to find a sliver of courage, or perhaps desperation. "Sir," he began, his voice hesitant, "what are you planning?" I didn't give him the full details. He didn't need to know the true extent of what I believed we were facing. But I told him I was setting up a way to monitor and potentially intercept whatever was causing the deaths. To my surprise, instead of trying to dissuade me, he offered a piece of local knowledge. "There is a belief," he said, looking around nervously, "that the Aswang cannot cross a line of blessed salt or pass by certain blessed herbs if they are hung correctly, and they are drawn to the scent of a dying person or a pregnant woman." The last part sent a chill down my spine, confirming my earlier observations about its victims. While I wouldn't endanger anyone, the information about deterrence was useful. He even offered to procure some of the specific herbs and a traditionally blessed stingray tail from an old woman in the village who was rumored to know such things, though he admitted he was doing so against his better judgment and without official sanction. His reluctant help was unexpected, a small but significant crack in the wall of fear and suspicion. It wouldn't change the odds regna significantly/drastically, but it was a reminder that even in the darkest of places, a spark of courage, or perhaps just a desperate hope for change, could still be found. As night approached, the trap was set. A combination of nearly invisible tripwires connected to flares and noisemakers around the mausoleum, lines of blessed salt mixed with crushed garlic forming a perimeter, and the potent, sharp-smelling herbs Ramos had brought hung at key entry points. I had my pistol, my knife, and a heavy-duty reinforced net I'd managed to cobble together. I found a concealed position, settled in for a long wait, and hoped my calculations were correct. The hunter was now waiting for the night hunter. The hours crawled by, each one stretching into an eternity. The jungle night was alive with its usual chorus, but beneath it, a different kind of tension thrummed. The taut silence of a hunter waiting for its prey, or in my case, a hunter waiting for a far more dangerous hunter. The moon, when it finally broke through the thick clouds, was a lurid, unsettling red, casting long, distorted shadows across the cemetery. A blood moon, fitting for the night's grim purpose. Just as a sliver of doubt began to creep into my mind, a faint, almost imperceptible whirring sound reached my ears, like the beating of enormous, leathery wings. It was coming from the direction I'd last seen the Aswang fly. My senses went on high alert, every nerve ending tingling. Then, I saw it, a dark silhouette against the blood-red moon, detaching itself from the canopy of the taller trees. The Manananggal. It circled once, twice, as if surveying its domain, then descended silently towards the old mausoleum. drawn perhaps by the residual scent of death or by some other, darker instinct. It didn't notice the tripwires at first. It landed with a soft, wet thud on the crumbling roof of the mausoleum, its grotesque, winged torso silhouetted against the sky. This was it. I triggered the first set of flares remotely. They erupted with a blinding white light and a deafening hiss, momentarily illuminating the horrifying creature in all its nightmarish detail. The elongated torso, the leathery wings, the trailing viscera, and a face that was a twisted parody of humanity, its eyes glowing with a malevolent crimson light. The ASWANG'S shrieked, a high-pitched, unearthly sound that clawed at my eardrums, startled by the sudden assault on its senses. It tried to take flight, but as it did, it snagged one of the lower, heavier tripwires I'd laced with the blessed herbs and small, sharp barbs. The wire didn't hold it, but it did throw off its balance, causing it to crash heavily to the ground near the entrance of the mausoleum, right into the area I'd prepared. I didn't hesitate. I broke cover, firing my pistol, aiming for its wings, trying to ground it. The bullets tore through the leathery membranes, eliciting another piercing shriek. But this thing was incredibly resilient, fueled by an unnatural vitality. It scrambled to its feet, or rather, its torso stump, its proboscis-like tongue lashing out, dripping a dark, viscous fluid. The fight was brutal, chaotic, and fought in close, desperate quarters. The ASWANG was astonishingly strong and fast, even on the ground. Its claws were like razors, and its winged form, even damaged, allowed it short, terrifying bursts of movement. I dodged a swipe that would have disemboweled me, feeling the wind of its passage. A searing pain shot through my shoulder as one of its claws grazed me, drawing blood. The traditional deterrents, the salt, the garlic, the herbs, seemed to have some effect. It recoiled from the salt lines, hissed at the garlic, and seemed genuinely agitated by the stingray tail I'd managed to whip across its path. But these were mere annoyances, not stoppers. I managed to throw the reinforced net over it as it lunged, momentarily entangling its wings. But it thrashed with incredible power, tearing at the heavy mesh. This was not going to be a simple capture. As I grappled with it, trying to find a vital point, I saw its eyes. And in those crimson depths, beyond the rage and the hunger, I thought I saw something else, a flicker of profound suffering, a deep-seated despair. It was a fleeting impression, quickly lost in the ferocity of the battle, but it planted a seed of unease. Was this creature purely evil, or was it too a victim in some horrifying way? The fight raged on. I was bleeding, bruised, and a growing sense of dread told me I couldn't keep this up indefinitely. The legends spoke of its lower half, the Katawan, hidden somewhere, needing to rejoin before dawn. If I could prevent that, perhaps, but my immediate problem was survival. The ASWANG, despite its injuries, was relentless. It broke free from the tattered remains of the net, its shriek now a guttural roar of pure fury. It lunged, not with its claws, but with its hideous fanged mouth, aiming for my throat. This was it. No more holding back. The complex questions about its nature, its potential suffering, would have to wait. Right now, it was me, or this thing. And I had no intention of becoming another one of its victims. The fight for survival, under the baleful glare of the blood moon, had reached its savage climax. The ASWANG's fanged maw lunged for my throat. I reacted on pure instinct, a desperate, last-ditch move. I brought my heavy boot up, a brutal kick connecting with the side of its grotesque head, sending it reeling back with a sickening crunch. It shrieked, a sound that was less rage now and more pain. Real, agonizing pain. It stumbled, its already damaged wings flailing uselessly. This was my chance. I pressed the advantage, not with bullets, but with the blessed stingray tail Officer Ramos had procured. I lashed out, the rough, sacred object connecting with its exposed, severed torso. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The Aswang convulsed violently, its crimson eyes flickering wildly. A different kind of sound tore from its throat. Not a monstrous shriek, but something heartbreakingly human, a wail of unbearable torment. And then, as I watched in stunned disbelief, the monstrous form began to change. The leathery wings seemed to recede, to wither. The elongated torso contracted. The fangs appeared to shrink, the proboscis-like tongue retracting. The grayish, leathery skin softened, paled. Before my horrified eyes, the creature that had been the Aswang collapsed, and in its place, lying amongst the tattered netting and scattered herbs, was a woman. She was gaunt, emaciated, her clothes in rags. Her face, contorted in agony, was vaguely familiar. I'd seen her before. A fleeting glimpse in the village. One of the most impoverished, most ignored members of the community, often seen begging or scrounging for scraps. Her eyes, no longer crimson but a dull, pain-filled brown, fluttered open, focusing on me with a dawning, terrible understanding. "Tulungan mo ako," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper, a Tagalog plea for help. "Help me." The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow, more devastating than any of the Aswang's attacks. This wasn't just a monster. This was a human being, transformed, cursed, or perhaps driven to this by an unimaginable desperation. The lower half, the katawan, wasn't hidden somewhere. It was her. The Manananggal wasn't just a creature, it was a horrifying metamorphosis. A profound weariness, far deeper than physical exhaustion, settled over me. The fight was over, but there was no triumph, only a bitter, aching hollowness. I looked at this woman, this Aswang, and the pieces clicked into place. The targeting of the weak, the vulnerable. It wasn't just predatory instinct. It was, perhaps, a horrifying reflection of her own suffering, her own marginalization, a desperate, twisted attempt to take from a world that had given her nothing but misery. The connection between the monster and the social injustices of this village was no longer a vague theory, it was a brutal, undeniable reality. Had poverty, neglect, and an unbearable burden of suffering twisted her into this? Or was it an ancient curse, preying on those already broken by circumstance? I didn't know, and perhaps it didn't matter. The result was the same, a cycle of horror. The loneliness of my path felt more acute than ever. Who could I tell this to? Officer Ramos? The terrified villagers? They would see only the monster, or perhaps a madwoman. They wouldn't understand the agonizing complexity, the heartbreaking tragedy. They would demand her death, a simple solution to a problem that was anything but Bladagas terra. She was fading, her breath shallow. The cure for an Aswang, according to some legends, was to find its detached lower half and sprinkle it with salt and garlic, preventing reattachment and eventually killing the creature. But what was the cure for a human being trapped in such a nightmare? My hand rested on my pistol. Ending her suffering now would be an act of mercy, perhaps, but it would also be an execution. And after Japan, after Kawa, something in me resisted that simple, brutal finality when faced with a creature that was clearly more than just mindless evil. The first light of dawn was beginning to touch the eastern sky. Time was running out for her, for the Aswang. I had to make a choice, a hard choice, with no right answers, only varying degrees of wrong. The villagers would soon be stirring. What would they find here? And what would become of the woman who was also the monster that had terrorized them? The bitter truth had been revealed, and now, the weight of an impossible decision rested solely on my shoulders. The first rays of the sun, an indifferent gold, began to pierce through the canopy, heralding a new day for the village of fear. For the woman lying before me, the transformed Aswang, it likely heralded only an end. Her breathing was a faint, ragged whisper. The monstrous form was gone, but the deep, unholy taint remained, a shadow in her pain-filled eyes. My choice, in the end, was made less by logic and more by a weary, reluctant empathy. I couldn't bring myself to simply execute her, not after seeing the human suffering beneath the monstrous facade. But I also couldn't leave her to potentially transform again, to continue the cycle of terror, however unwillingly. and I certainly couldn't reveal her true nature to the villagers. Their fear would demand a brutal, immediate justice. Using what little medical knowledge I possessed, and some of the more potent and hopefully fast-acting tranquilizers from my kit, not the ones the other hunters had carried, but my own, designed for larger, more resilient subjects, I administered a dose I hoped would be final, a release from her tormented existence, as quick and painless as I could make it. It felt less like an execution and more like a grim, necessary act of mercy, a euthanizing of a creature trapped between two worlds, neither of which offered her peace. As her breathing stilled, a profound sadness settled over me. Another life extinguished, another mystery that left more questions than answers. Before the village fully awoke, I did what I could to obscure the true nature of what had happened. I moved her body deeper into the mausoleum, making it look as though the Aswang had simply succumbed to its wounds there after our battle. I left some of the traditional deterrents, the garlic, the salt, the stingray tail, prominently displayed, a nod to the villagers' beliefs, a way for them to feel they had played a part in their own deliverance, or that their ancient protections had finally worked. I met briefly with Officer Ramos as I prepared to leave. I told him the Aswang was dead, that the creature had been cornered and dealt with. I didn't elaborate. He looked relieved, but also deeply shaken, the horrors of the past weeks etched on his young face. I left him with a warning that fear and neglect could breed their own kinds of monsters, and that the village needed to look after its most vulnerable or risk inviting new darkness. Whether he or anyone would heed it, I didn't know. Wafa. Leaving the Philippines, I carried more than just physical scars from the encounter. The Aswang, and the woman she had been, had carved a deeper lesion into my already fractured psyche. It was a brutal reminder of the complexities of evil, of how suffering and societal neglect could birth horrors far more tangible than any supernatural curse. The line between monster and victim had never been so blurred, so agonizingly thin. And, as always, the specter of the agency loomed. Did they know about beings like this? Humans twisted into monstrous forms by circumstance or by some forgotten science? Were these Aswang phenomena something they studied, manipulated, or even created? The thought was a cold knot in my stomach. My lost memories felt less like a void and more like a locked room, and I was increasingly terrified of what I might find if I ever managed to open the door. The jeepney rattled away from the village, leaving the scent of damp earth and unspoken sorrow behind. My journey was endless, a relentless pursuit of shadows, both external and internal. The burden of it all felt heavier with each encounter, each life lost, each hard choice made in the dark. Yet, a stubborn resolve remained. I would keep going. I had to, because somewhere out there, amidst the monsters and the mysteries, lay the truth about who I was and why I had become the monster tracker. And perhaps, just perhaps, a chance to finally put the ghosts of my past to rest, or so I hoped. The next encrypted message, the next whisper of a new horror in some forgotten corner of the world, was likely already on its way.